I never set foot in a church. I used God's name only as a swear word, but after dying and being rescued by Jesus himself, I asked him something no believer would dare ask, which is the one true church. Jesus answered me, and what he said is something no denomination wants you to hear. Today, we are going to read the story of a man who died in a hospital in Paris in 1985, a university professor, a self-proclaimed atheist, someone who used reason as a shield and cynicism as a weapon, a man who not only didn't believe in God but mocked those who did, and that man, at the lowest point of his life, came face to face with something no science book could explain to him. This story is based on true events. Names have been changed to protect the privacy of those who lived through this story. Throughout this video, we are going to discover several things together that I find important. What does Jesus do when a convinced atheist calls out to him for the first time in his life? Is there a church that God recognizes as the true one? How can a single experience completely transform a person's life? Those questions have answers, and we will find them in George's story. If you are already here and want to know what Jesus answered, type Jesus in the comments. That tells me you're ready. Let's get to the story. George's story begins long before the hospital. It begins with the kind of man he was. I was an art professor at a university in the northern United States. I was 38 years old. I had a career built on discipline, hard work, and measurable results. My students respected me. My colleagues acknowledged me. From the outside, everything seemed in order. But there was something else that defined who I was, and it wasn't my career. I was an atheist. I wasn't one of those who doubted in silence, nor one of those who said I don't know just to avoid committing to a stance. I was an atheist, openly, staunchly so, and I took pleasure in saying it out loud. I mocked religion. I viewed it as a crutch for people who lacked the courage to face reality as it truly is. If anyone mentioned God in my presence, I always had a ready retort, and it was never a kind one. To me, the world was exactly what could be seen, touched, and measured, nothing more. If science couldn't explain something, it was simply because there wasn't enough data yet, not because something supernatural existed. That was my stance. Music, firm and unshakable. I used God's name only as a swear word. I say this now without pride, but back then, I didn't even give it a second thought. It was automatic. It was simply who I was. I controlled people with my temper. I used rage whenever I wanted things done my way, at home, at work, or with my students. I wasn't an easy person to love, though I didn't see it that way at the time. I believed I was being direct and honest, that I simply had no tolerance for mediocrity. What I failed to see was the damage I left in my wake. On June 1, 1985, I was traveling to Paris, France, with my wife. It was one of those academic trips planned months in advance, European art, museums, and historical context to bring back to the classroom. It was exactly the kind of activity I valued, intellectual, cultural, concrete. We arrived, settled in, and then something started, a pain, not like the pains one usually knows. This was different. It was as if something inside my abdomen were tearing apart from the inside out. I had no name for it at the time. I only knew it was the most intense pain I had ever felt in my 38 years of life. My wife called immediately. They took me to Broussard Hospital in Paris, a public hospital, well known, with a long history. But that afternoon, things didn't move quickly. It took hours for the doctors to attend to me with the urgency the case required, hours during which the pain never stopped, hours spent lying on a gurney, not fully understanding what was happening inside my own body. When the diagnosis finally came, it was clear, a perforated duodenal ulcer. In simple terms, it meant my stomach had a complete perforation. Gastric contents were leaking into my abdominal cavity. It is a condition that kills without intervention, and the intervention hadn't come in time. At some point that afternoon, I felt a certainty that required no medical explanation. I was going to die. I didn't think of it as a mere possibility. I didn't consider it just one scenario among many. I knew it with the same clarity with which I knew that 2 + 2 = 4. My body was telling me so. Bluntly, I looked at my wife and told her I loved her. It was all I could do. Music, words were scarce, and the pain was overwhelming. It was a farewell, even though neither of us spoke the word. I closed my eyes and waited. I didn't pray, it never even crossed my mind. God didn't exist in my world, so there was no one to call upon. I felt no religious remorse. I had no epiphany in that moment. There was only pain, and beyond that pain, I expected what I had always believed came after death: nothingness, the final blackout, the end of consciousness, the great silence from which no one returns because there is no one left to return. That was what I believed, with absolute conviction, awaited me on the other side of that moment. Intelligent men, I had told myself for years, understand that death is the end. No exceptions, no mystery, just biology coming to a halt. I closed my eyes, and what happened next defied every one of my preconceptions. There was no darkness, no silence, none of what I had expected. I found myself standing beside my bed in that same hospital room, only now I was standing next to my own body, looking down at it. My body lay there, motionless on the bed. My wife was sitting beside it. My roommate was in the room as well. My initial reaction was exactly that of a man of science. This can't be happening. This is impossible. I'm seeing something that has no explanation within any framework that I know of. I started screaming. I yelled at my wife. I insulted her to get her to pay attention to me, because that's who I was. When I wanted someone to react, I turned up the volume. She didn't move. She didn't turn around. She remained like a statue. I yelled at my roommate. Nothing. It was as if I didn't exist for them, as if I was on the other side of a glass that no one else could see. Then I heard voices from the hallway. They called me by my name. They said that they were coming to help me, that they were going to take care of me, that I should follow them. I asked them who they were. They responded urgently, "Come, you'll see." I followed him. As I crossed the door of the room, I entered a clear mist at first, almost white. I could see my hand if I extended it. But the figures calling to me were always 15 or 20 meters ahead, moving backwards every time I tried to get closer. I followed it deeper and deeper and the fog became denser, darker. At first they seemed like normal people. They behaved in an almost friendly, almost playful way. But as we progressed and I kept asking questions that they didn't answer, something in them changed. They became aggressive. They started making comments about me, about my hospital gown open at the back, about how pathetic I looked. They laughed. It wasn't a soft mocking laugh, it was a laugh that had something dark inside. I wanted to go back, I didn't know how. There were no landmarks, there was no direction, there was nothing to show me the way back. Just fog, cold wet ground under my bare feet and those figures around me that were no longer pretending to be friendly. When I stopped and told them I wasn't going to continue moving forward, everything changed. They jumped on me. What followed, I don't have precise words to describe, but I'll try. It was like a mob, dozens, maybe hundreds, all on top of me at the same time. They bit me. They scratched me. They tore off pieces of me and they did it slowly, carefully. Almost, because they wanted it to last. My pain was exactly what they were looking for. Every time I reacted, tried to defend myself, hit one and pushed him away, there were 5 more ready to replace him. It was a game and I was the center of that game. I fought with everything I had for a long time. But there came a time when I had nothing left. I fell, remained on the ground, destroyed, without the strength to move. Some of the creatures continued to peck at me, biting me, but with less enthusiasm. It wasn't as fun anymore because he wasn't responding anymore. The darkness was total and I was convinced that this was the absolute end, not the end that I had imagined, the quiet nothingness, but something much worse, something active, something that hurt. It was at that moment that I heard something. It didn't come from outside, it came from inside me. It was my own voice, but I wasn't the one controlling it. It said, "Pray to God." My mind immediately responded, "I don't know how to pray, I never learned, I don't believe in God, I have nothing to say." The voice repeated it, a second time, a third, and I, lying on that dark floor, surrounded by creatures, without strength, without options, I began to say the only thing I remembered from when I was a child, fragments, single phrases that I had heard at some time without paying attention to them. The Lord is my shepherd, I will lack nothing. God bless America, our Father who art in heaven. The creatures reacted as if I had poured boiling oil on them. They shouted, they told me to stop, that there was no God, that no one listened to me, that I was a coward. But the more they shouted, the more they retreated. My words, those phrases that I myself would have considered ridiculous hours before, were driving them away. I continued stronger until they were gone. I was left alone, in complete darkness, not knowing if what had just happened was real or if I was mentally disintegrating, without energy, without direction, feeling myself slowly disappearing into that blackness, and then, with the last thing I had left, I screamed a name, the name that I had used for decades only as an insult. I screamed it with everything, with every ounce of strength I had left in that place where there was nothing more to hold on to. Jesus, please save me. I don't know how long I was lying there. There was no way to measure it. There was darkness and silence, and the feeling that what little I had left was slowly going out, like a candle that had already reached the end of the wax. No drama, no noise, just gradual extinction. I had no hope, not because I was pessimistic at the time, but because there was literally nothing to hold on to. But the darkness remained, and I was so broken, so emptied, that I couldn't even hold a full thought. That was when I heard it. It didn't come from outside, it came from a place within me I didn't know existed. It was a melody, a song I had learned as a child in a Sunday school I'd attended only a few times, a song so simple it's almost embarrassing to mention. Jesus loves me, I know it. I don't know why that came up at that moment. I didn't seek it out, I didn't summon it, it was simply there, repeating itself, and something inside me, something nameless and inexplicable, wanted to believe it, not with certainty, not with intellectual conviction, but simply with the desperation of someone who has absolutely nothing else. And from that place, with everything I had left, I cried out inwardly, Jesus, please save me. It wasn't an elaborate prayer, it wasn't theology, it was the cry of a drowning man reaching out for the only thing nearby, even though he wasn't sure it was real. And then I saw it. In the total darkness, something tiny appeared, a distant point of light, like a star seen from the bottom of the ocean. I thought it was a meteor. I thought my mind was conjuring images as it shut down, but it was moving toward me, in seconds, or what we would call seconds here. That light grew and kept growing, and when it drew near, it wasn't just bright, it was something I lack the words to describe precisely, because the language I know wasn't designed for this. It was light, but not light like the sun or a light bulb. It was light that held something living within it, something that thought, something that felt, and when that light enveloped me, I simply rose, effortlessly, without doing a thing. I just lifted up, as if gravity had ceased to apply, and in that moment, I saw something I still struggle to process today. I watched my wounds vanish, everything those creatures had done to me, the tears, the bites, the chunks torn away, was undone, as if it had never happened. I became whole again and began to weep, not out of sadness. That is the first thing I need to clarify, because crying in that context had nothing to do with pain. It was quite the opposite. It was as if something that had been locked away inside me for 38 years suddenly burst open, and everything within came pouring out at once. I wept as I never had in my life, uncontrollably, without shame, without wanting to stop, and as I wept, I understood something. That light knew me, not in a general sense, not the way one knows a stranger whose name one learned 5 minutes ago. It knew me, specifically, completely. It knew things about me that I myself had forgotten. It knew things I had never told a soul. It knew me better than my own mother, better than my wife, better than anyone who had ever been close to me in my entire life. And with that total knowledge, with everything it knew about me, which was no small amount, and not pretty, it loved me. That it was what broke me the most, not the rescue, not the light, not the vanishing wounds, but that, being fully known and fully loved at the same time, because in my experience, those two things did not coexist. The more someone knew about me, the less reason they had to love me. That was how my life had always worked, but this was different. Music, it was a powerful, radiant presence, devoid of any shadow, utterly good, and I use that word precisely, not as mere decoration. It was goodness itself, concentrated into a form of light that. He held me as if I were the most important thing in existence at that moment. Later, I understood who he was. It was Jesus. He led me away from that darkness. We began to move quickly, and the blackness was left behind, and at some point along the way, I saw something in the distance that I cannot compare to anything in this world. It was like a galaxy, but larger, denser, more alive, a center of impossible luminosity, and around that center, millions of beings of light were moving in and out, as if that place were the origin of everything. I wanted to go there, yet I couldn't, because at that moment, the full weight of my life came crashing down on me. Every moment I had used someone, every time I had feigned passion while feeling bored inside, every person I had hurt with my temper, it all came flooding back at once, and what I felt was shame, a shame so profound that all I wanted to do was hide. I said to him, "No, you've made a mistake, send me back to the pit," and he answered with a calmness that held no trace of indifference, but was filled with absolute certainty, "We do not make mistakes, you belong here." Those words, that man who had spent decades telling everyone that God didn't exist, that religion was a fantasy, that there was nothing after death, that man was hearing from the very source that he did, in fact, belong. I couldn't argue with it, not because I ran out of arguments, but because in the presence of that light, the truth was obvious. I was exactly where I was meant to be. The beings of light surrounding that center invited me to see something, my life, not as I remembered it, not from my own perspective, where there was always a justification, always a reason, always someone else who shared the blame. They didn't show it to me from the outside, as if I were a spectator watching another man live. I saw scenes I had forgotten, I saw moments I thought were insignificant, I saw the faces of my students when I pretended to listen to them while checking my watch under the desk, I saw how I used anger to control the people around me, I saw the damage I inflicted on my father, on my family, on people who only wanted to get close to me but found a wall instead. They didn't tell me I was bad, there was no verbal judgment, but I could feel what they felt as they watched each scene. And when a moment appeared where I had acted selfishly, or with cruelty disguised as honesty, something in them would sadden, not with anger, but with a feeling more akin to the sorrow of watching someone squander something precious. And when a moment appeared, the few that existed, where I had acted with genuine love, without music, calculation or ulterior motives, they would fill with something I can only describe as pure joy. What this made clear to me was brutal in its simplicity. Everything I had valued in my life, my career, my degrees, music, academic recognition, measurable achievements, meant nothing to them, zero, not because having those things was bad, but because that wasn't what mattered. The only thing that mattered was how I had treated people, nothing else. I asked them about the Bible because I had opened it several times in my life, always looking for errors, always looking for contradictions to confirm what I already believed. Music, they told me yes, that it was true, and when I told them it didn't seem that way to me, they showed me something about my own review of my life. Every time I opened it like a prosecutor, not like a reader. They taught me that the book doesn't work that way, that it is read in prayer, that when you read it seeking truth instead of looking for flaws, the book itself opens up and speaks, that it isn't like other books. After that, I asked the question. I don't know exactly why I asked it at that moment, perhaps because I had spent my whole life using the diversity of religions as an argument to dismiss them all. If there were so many and they all contradicted each other, the logical conclusion was that none of them was right. Then I asked, what is the best religion? I expected a denomination, I expected a name. I thought that if anyone in the universe knew the correct answer, it was the place where I was. The answer was this: the best religion is the one that brings you closest to God. I fell silent because it wasn't what I expected, yet I couldn't argue with it either. It wasn't an evasion, It was an answer with a precision that took me time to fully process. Not a name, not a structure, not a building, nor a doctrine, nor a system of rules, but a relationship. Closeness to God was the criterion. Everything else was secondary. After that, I was told I had to go back. I didn't want to. I fought that decision with everything I had, but they spoke to me again about my wife, my children, and the people who needed me, and finally, I agreed. I returned to my body. The pain was immediate and brutal, as if everything that had been absent came rushing back all at once, but something in me was different, irreversibly different. I resigned from my professorship. I studied theology at the United Theological Seminary. I became a pastor. The man who used God's name only as an insult ended up dedicating his life to speaking about him. I published all of this in my book. The story is documented. The interviews are recorded. This is neither an interpretation nor a metaphor. This is what happened. What George experienced in that place possesses a coherence that cannot be ignored. That answer, the best religion is the one that brings you closest to God, is not a new idea. Jesus himself told the Samaritan woman in John 4:23 that the Father seeks worshippers who worship him in spirit and in truth, not in a specific temple, not under a particular denomination, but in spirit and in truth. And in Matthew 7:21, Jesus was even more direct. Not everyone who says to him, Lord, Lord, one enters the kingdom. The criterion is not the name of the church where one sits every Sunday. The criterion is a real relationship with God, obedience born of love, not of habit or fear. Music, what George was told does not contradict the scriptures, it confirms them. An atheist who never set foot in a church came to understand this in a way that many who have spent decades inside one still do not. That is worth pausing over and worth an honest question. Is the church I attend today drawing me closer to God, or simply keeping me busy with religious activities? The difference matters, and based on George's experience, and what the Word confirms, it matters more to God than anything else. This account is backed by 51 years of documented history, recorded interviews, a published book, and lectures given over decades. George didn't just tell this story once in a moment of emotion, he told it hundreds of times. Music, with unwavering consistency until the end of his life. A man who dedicated his existence to denying God ended up dedicating it to preaching him. You cannot fabricate that, you cannot sustain that for 40 years unless it is true. What strikes me most about this story is not the description of hell, disturbing as it is, nor the light, extraordinary though it may be. It is the question George asked Jesus, because it is the same question millions of people ask themselves today within their own churches, silently, not daring to say it aloud. What is the true? And the answer received doesn't point to a building, it points to a heart. That is exactly what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 3, music, verse 16, do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? The temple where God dwells has no postal address, no denomination on its facade, it is the person who truly seeks him. The church God recognizes is not identified by its name, but by what it produces in those who make it up, real closeness to God, genuine love for people, and a faith that transforms, not a faith that merely occupies a seat every week. If this analysis sparked some reflection, music, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Every week, we look at stories like this, real, documented accounts, and analyze them in the light of the Word. And if anything you saw today moved you, please hit the like button. That helps us continue bringing this content to more people who are also seeking answers. The search for truth continues. God, music, is with us.